Hello, I'm Kelly, and I'll be analyzing the design of my infographic on Patagonia. I chose this topic because I think Patagonia is an inspirational company. They have proven that businesses can be successful while putting social responsibility and the environment first. Visual potential is the ability to convey a message or concept visually. Visual potential can be represented through appearance, relationship, location, time, and through numbers. On this slide, I have also included a side-by-side view of my model and my final infographic. The visual potential of appearance uses characteristics or an association of something you recognize to show how something looks. In my display, I use several objects to represent the appearance and identify the topic of the infographic. The Patagonia logo is fairly recognizable, so I use an outline of the mountains from the logo and have it touching the title to show the interaction between the title and the logo, which will help the viewer recognize that the infographic is about the company and not the place. The logo does slightly deviate from my model since the model doesn't have any outlined shapes, but I felt it was still important to include. The most prominent image in my infographic is the photograph of the mountain range. I chose to use a realistic photo to help teach the viewer where the inspiration of the logo came from. Not all viewers will associate the mountain range to the company logo, which is why I felt it was important to display both in the infographic and help give the association between the two. I also use a large image of the jacket, which is one of the most popular items sold and widely recognized. These three displays exploit the visual potential of appearance and help the viewer recognize the topic. Visual potential of relationships show how objects are related to each other through the use of lines or positioning to show connections or interactions between objects. For my relationship display, I wanted to convey the message that Patagonia is more than a clothing company. As a certified benefit corporation, they are dedicated to the environment and social performance. To convey this message, I show the relationship between Patagonia's mission and actions that help identify them as a benefit corporation. This display slightly deviates from my model, with the lines making a hexagon shape. I tried several iterations using the curved lines, but they always came off slightly strange looking, and using the thicker lines that my model uses felt too heavy for the topic. I encode the relationship by positioning Patagonia's mission in the center of the display in a larger font. Then around the central message, I show 5 of the ways Patagonia is achieving that mission. I place one of the key aspects in the top left corner and use a black line to make it more prominent so the viewer knows which message to read first. I then have the colors get lighter as they move around the circle. The colors are not necessarily in order of importance. It is more of a guiding function for the viewer and to help tell the story. I also use icons to display the visual potential of appearance and help the reader get an idea of what each section is about before having to read the text. I acknowledge that this isn't a strong relationship display, as it doesn't specifically have lines or overlapping effects to show interactions or hierarchy. The problem was that this message is important to help tell the overall story of the infographic, but there isn't a specific hierarchy in terms of level of importance for each category. Visual potential of location helps show where objects are in relation to each other. I use a world map to show the locations of each supplier that is used in the production of this specific down jacket. I use a moderately realistic map to match the level of detail of the icons and thin leading lines to point to the location of each supplier. I chose to use the simple map, thin lines, and small boxes since the specific location of each company is less important than the overall message that the company uses suppliers from around the world. I had originally wanted to use lines to show the production path and ideally would have been able to use a contrasting color, but due to my color model, black would have been my only option. And for proper layering, I would have needed to use thick black lines, which came off feeling messy. The visual potential of time tells us when things happened relative to each other or as a sequence of events. I use a timeline in a top to bottom view with darker colors at the top and moving down a path to lighter colors. The timeline shows a few key dates but since the timing between the dates is less important and there is a significant gap between the 80s and 2000s due to some economic hardships, I decided to keep the space between the events the same size and highlight the specific sequence of events instead. The visual potential of numbers can show the amount and size of values. Patagonia switched to organic cotton, and I wanted the viewer to understand the significance of the impact of this change by using a proportional value to showing that 25% of all toxic pesticides used in agriculture are caused from farming cotton. To encode the proportional value, I used an icon of a cotton plant and colored the bottom quarter a dark gray to show the negative association of the toxic pesticides. I feel like black may have been a better encoding for the message and a better match for my model. But when the infographic was put together, the black color made this display stand out too much, and this display specifically is lower in the hierarchy. To be honest, I don't think this is a very impactful numbers display. I had really wanted to use an isotype chart to show the amount of clothes the company recycles or water it saves from recycling. However, I was not able to come up with a relatable image to properly represent weight or size that also fit with the topic. It has been an ongoing struggle to make sure that the viewer identified the topic to the clothing company, and the images in the isotype came off too strong and confused the reader about what the topic was about. So I'll first talk about the visual language model. Visual language represents the overall style of the infographic through line treatment, shapes, fills, textures, and level of detail. My visual language model has a clean and professional feel with a lot of structure. The style guide uses a variety of rectangular shapes and icons with mostly solid fills. There's a limited use of gradients that are also okay. The model does use some patterns and wavy bars. I deviated from the model by not incorporating the patterns or wavy lines as they came off too heavy for my topic. My visual language model uses realistic photos in grayscale with transparent reflections, which I emulated with the photo of the mountain range and the book. My model also has moderately realistic icons that have some level of detail, which are also emulated throughout my infographic. I created the lines in my timeline display using a play on the curved lines in my model as shown on the right. The model uses different sizes of lines which equate to different values. Since the thickness of lines in my model don't have a meaning, I used one of the thinner lines for aesthetic purposes in order to make sure the display wasn't too heavy. I found this to be an ongoing challenge throughout creating my infographic, as my model is based on a somewhat negative topic, whereas my topic is quite positive. I've had to be very cautious with how I use the darker colors and thicker lines. Color can be used to highlight, communicate, and guide attention. It can help set the tone and be used for encoding or associations. My color model uses blacks to set a somewhat negative tone, which doesn't quite match my topic, as Patagonia is known for having bright colors. I knew this would be somewhat risky and would be quite challenging, but I was drawn towards the professional, clean look of this model. I discovered the key to avoiding a negative emotion in my model was to use black more sparingly than my model does. My model has a monochromatic harmony of black, white, and grays. This is the color palette which also uses a gradient for each shade of gray. I used the solid black photograph of the jacket even though this deviates from my visual language and color models. I felt it was important to highlight the photo by using the darker color to help translate it as an appearance feature and identify the topic. For the rest of the displays, I used mostly grays and limited use of gradient. Typography is used to complement visual elements. My model uses Arial Black, Arial Bold, Arial Regular, and Goody Old Style. These fonts give a professional feel with a fancy element. With the exception of the title, all the fonts that are used are actually quite small. The title and section headings all use Arial Black in all caps. The quote is in slightly larger font and uses Arial Bold with mixed case. The text under the section headings are in Arial Bold with the first letter of every word capitalized. The bulleted list uses Arial Regular, and the identity labels use Arial Bold for the title and the Arial Regular for the body. This slightly deviates from my model as they use all caps for annotations and identity labels, but I switched to mixed caps for readability purposes. Finally, the text body is in Goody old style. Visual hierarchy communicates the importance of information, which can be done through size, level of detail, and proximity. The photograph of the mountain range is highly detailed in the largest display in a central position on the infographic, giving it the highest level of hierarchy. This is meant to attract interest and draw the viewer into the display. The black jacket is next highest in the hierarchy. It is also relatively large but smaller than the mountain. The black color is eye-catching, which helps make it more prominent. In my model, the black diagram in the center is very prominent, so I tried to incorporate a large black object without having it be too heavy and detracting from the topic. The Patagonia title is the largest, boldest text and in all caps, which makes it next in the level of hierarchy. I designed the logo to come out of the title and help guide the viewer towards the quote. The viewer may naturally move to the relationship display on the left, but to help guide them, I also made the lines slightly thicker than any other lines, with a black line at the top left to give it a higher hierarchy. Another subtle strategy was to help guide the viewer was to place the message about the supply chain next to the location display, with the truck driving towards the map. And now I'll discuss unity and variety. There is unity in the text throughout my infographic as I use the same font for the section headings and subheadings. I tried to keep the unity by having some of the same icons throughout the display for related topics. I also used the dark to light color variations throughout the relationship display, time display, and even for the photographs with the reflections and the gradient fading from darker to lighter colors. I considered using some of the same line treatments for the relationship display as I do in the time display, as it better matches my visual language model. But I chose not to in order to portray variety and make the display more interesting. I also use variety in the sense of using various photographs and icons. And now I'll talk about the layout. My model is separated into 6 key segments. I follow the same basic layout with the addition of adding another segment in the bottom left corner to fill the white space, since my image wasn't quite as long as the image in my model. Alignment is very important in this display in order to get the clean, organized feel. All the text in the graphics are left aligned. Throughout the display, I try to perfectly match the proportions of the display and my model. There is also significant white space between each display to separate the message and make sure it doesn't feel too busy. My final infographic. I emulated my color, my typography, my visual language, and my layout models by using visual potential of location, numbers, appearance, relationship, and time. Thank you for listening.